was the morning when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. It was afternoon there, or late afternoon. It was morning here. And I had been laying on the floor listening to the radio, and all of a sudden it came on the air that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor and sank a bunch of ships and killed a bunch of sailors, and even dropped bombs on the city of Honolulu and killed a lot of pedestrians. And it was an exciting kind of morning, but on the other hand, it was very frightening too, because you didn't know what do we do now, you know? Well, FDR came on and made a speech about what had taken place, and that the Army in Pearl Harbor was still intact, and we were still would be able to keep the Japanese from taking Pearl Harbor. And then we just, from that point on, it just was very military. Everything was, we were rationed on the amount of food we could have, buy. It just was for a 12-year-old kid to remember. But anyway, it was just a frightening morning, you know. You know, I remember me asking Grandpa, I said, what do we do now? And he says, well, we probably go to war, you know. He says, we'll probably go to bomb the Japanese, because they bombed Pearl Harbor, and they bombed Manila, and they bombed Wake Island, and they bombed just a mess of things.
Yeah.
That first couple days, you know. And I said, well, if the war lasts long, if I go to the service, I want to go to the Navy. I don't want to go to the Army. And my mother says, well, you're not going anywhere. My grandmother said that to me. She said, you're staying home. I said, well, we'll see.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a couple of years before I did go into the service. And I went to San Diego to boot camp. And that was I won't say it was scary, but I just really didn't know what to expect. It was a whole different environment than I was being raised at.
Oh yeah.
And so it took me a while to get myself adjusted, and when I was able to join the Navy, instead of being drafted, I joined the Navy and became went to San Diego and did my boot camp there, and then went to aboard the USS Bennington, and I got some information on that I can give you too.
All right.
It was a CV-20, it was an aircraft carrier, and since the war had been on for a while, it was brand new. It was one of the ships that they built, started building the very day that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So the Bennington was CV-20, and I think at the time the war started, the 20 count is the number of ships of that class. So there were 20 aircraft carriers, just like the one I was on. And it was an Essex class, which was the name of the first ship that was built on those plans, was the Essex. And so it was called the Essex class. And boot camp was an experience. In boot camp, you were led by two people. they had you divided up into companies, and the company commander was the chief, and then under him were 2 enlisted men, but were either third, second, or first class something. They didn't have to be any given thing. As long as they had 1, 2, and 3 chevrons on their sleeve, then they were eligible to be part of the training group. And we went to boot camp, and those guys were just meaner than heck. I mean, they were really drilling it into you because I come to think about it, I think they were probably as confused as we were and as concerned as we were as kids that they were in the war, and we just went into total training. And when we came out of boot camp, we could do almost anything that they wanted us to do in terms of being a person who could handle a war situation. They taught you that there are going to be people bombing you, and there are going to be people doing this, and there are going to be people doing this, and you have to be able to do this and that.
That must have been terrifying.
Oh, it was. The first week in boot camp was unbelievable. And then it kind of caught on, you know. And besides that, the chief was such a mean old guy that you had to learn to live with him. And the other things just kind of fell in place, you know. My chief was a little bitty guy. He probably didn't weigh much more than you do, but he was shorter, and just as in charge of things as you could be, you know.
Oh yeah.
He said jump, you said how high and how far. And then they had a third class, I can't remember what his rating was, third class something, and we had a first class something. And one was a boatswain, I remember that the first class was, but can't remember what the other one was. And in that 10 weeks we were in boot camp, they taught us all about the Navy history, the Navy ships, what ships did what you were expected to do when you went aboard ship, what the discipline was, how you saluted, who you saluted, why you saluted. The whole thing they laid out to you in terms of you becoming a seaman in the Navy.
Right.
And when you left there, man, you knew when to jump and when not to jump, and start with the left foot instead of the right foot. Did you know that when you march, you start with the left foot and not the right foot?
I have friends in ROTC and they know that stuff, but I don't.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that was what we learned, and we didn't have ROTC in those days.
Oh, yeah.
So. And but I enjoyed the Navy. I really did. I got aboard the Bennington, and when I got aboard the Bennington, I got a picture of it and everything. I'll give you, and we can make a copy of it if you want it.
I think that you already gave me a bunch of printouts of it, but that'd be interesting, yeah.
Did you? Did I give you some? Okay. Well, I don't remember what I've done.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, so there, Al, ask me some more.
Alright, well, what did you think about the Allied leaders? So FDR, Churchill, and Stalin back at the start of the war and throughout it.
Well, they were the good guys. And FDR and Churchill got along all right. They had little problems with the Russian. And the Russian, he ran things his way. The other two guys kind of worked together. But it worked out all right because the Russians dealt with the eastern side of Europe. and they spent most of their time protecting being invaded. Russians are being invaded, so they set up their defense in Poland and in that area so that the Germans couldn't come into Russia. And the Allies, which were England and France and America, USA, we set up our defense in France and the Baltic area. And we sent our Navy over there. We didn't send our Marines, we sent our Marines to the other ocean. They did most of their fighting in the Pacific. And in the Atlantic side, or in the European side of the war, and the war was going on all over. That's the reason it was called a world war. And that's what I was coming up with. The Americans and the French and the British dealt with just the European part of the war. And then the U.S. had to deal with also the Pacific side of the war because they were being attacked at Pearl Harbor. But that didn't have anything to do with England, France, and that country. So the U.S. was actually fighting two wars with the same army, but in two different places.
Were the Chinese your allies in World War in the Pacific?
Well, they were, but they didn't do anything.
Okay.
The only reason they were an ally was to keep them from fighting. And both on our behalf and on the Japanese behalf. And I don't think they would have fought the Japanese.
Because Japan invaded China.
Yeah. And but they didn't do a lot with fighting it. And we did all of our fighting in France and Germany. And then in Pearl Harbor and the island hopping, what they call island hopping. They hop from Wake Island to whatever islands there are.
Did Guam.
Midway and Guam and all of those. And it was very difficult for the Americans because not only did we have to supply the war with men, we had to supply the war with equipment. So if we send all our men to war, how do we make the equipment? So what would your answer be? Have the women do it.
Yeah, that works.
That's right. That's what they did.
So now that goes to one of my questions about your mom and the steel mill. What did she do in there?
Well, she was a clerk or a secretary type of person.
Oh, okay.
She didn't work in the mill. When she went over, they needed persons in the payroll and that part because they had to replace all these guys that were working out in the mill and the women, and they had to redo the payrolls and everything because the mill paid on seniority. If you had 5 years of service in the mill, you got paid a certain amount of money. If you had 6 years, you may have got another 2 or 3%, or 10%, or whatever it might have been. So the wage scale was dependent upon how many years you had in service into the mill working. And so that's what my mom did. She worked, had no idea ever had done anything like that in her life, and went over there and they put her right to work as building a payroll for the women because they didn't think they could pay the women the same amount of money they could pay men. So they had to build a whole new schedule for the women, and the men that worked there were on one schedule, and the women that worked there were on another schedule. And that happened all the way through the war because the guys that were too old to go to the war or had a disability that couldn't go to the war, the CF&I still kept them doing something, whether it was Boston or whether it was actually helping make the steel. And so it was interesting to what was going on, you know. And my mother stayed. She retired from there. And after the war was over, she was a big shot in the mill. And I mean that not in the sense that she was a
She was a supervisor, wasn't she?
She was a supervisor. She'd been there long enough that she could supervise in the payroll department. She could tell the new guys and so forth that came into the pay department, you do it this way and this way and so forth. And my mom was a very intelligent person. Math, numbers and math were just not a problem for her. She could do anything with numbers that you wanted her to do. And I don't know why she didn't let me have some of that, because I know nothing about numbers.
Oh yeah.
None of us inherited that.
And so anyway, that's kind of that next question.
All right. So now, what did you and I guess your friends think about the Axis leaders? So like Hitler, Mussolini.
Hitler and Mussolini, we just thought were devils.
Yeah.
We kind of laughed at Mussolini. He was a big, chunky guy, and was really in charge of the Italian people. Although he was not the intellect that Hitler was. Hitler was a very intelligent man, and he ran the German war machine to an nth degree. I mean, he was good. And if we hadn't had some generals that were as good as he was, we'd have been really off it, and he would have won. But he was a very intelligent man, but he was an obnoxious person too.
Yeah. So now, do you remember the days that they died? So Mussolini being hung and then Hitler killing himself?
No, I don't remember.
Well, how was your reaction when you found out about them?
Oh, we were just happy.
Oh yeah.
Oh, guy's gone.
Do you remember when FDR died?
Yeah. The whole station went into mourning. Everything slowed down and stopped, and we had memorial services for FDR. The Republicans were glad to get rid of him. The Democrats were very sorry that he had to die. And the Republicans had some respect for him in terms of leadership, but they didn't have it because he was in the other party. And basically that's the way things were when FDR was.
And so now, how did Truman handle the war?
Truman was, I don't know that he handled it any different than what the other guys did. He was, I guess we were afraid he wasn't going to be in charge enough of it, that he didn't have the smartness that FDR had. People thought FDR was just beyond replacement. And although if you ask a Republican what they thought of FDR, they could say that SOB.
Yeah.
But yet they did what he said.
Oh yeah.
And pretty much that.
So now, do you remember the atomic bombs being dropped? So now, what do you remember of that?
We're all scared.
How come?
Well, we're afraid that if the Japanese have something that does that to us, what's going to happen to our coastal towns or our seaports. And I think we were just frightened to the point we didn't know how we could handle that. We knew we could do it, but we didn't know how.
Yeah.
I think as Americans we had all the confidence in the world that we could do what we needed to do, but how soon and how good could we do it? And I think we were very much concerned about our ability to take over that big of a chore, or chore is the wrong word, I don't need that, that big of a, what's the word I want, frightened or, no? Well, chore's all right, I guess, that big of a
works.
chore. We were concerned that he was just one step ahead of us, and we were going to lose some men, and we were going to lose some territories, but when it was all over, we would get back and get our stuff back in line the way we had it to begin with. And I think we, as Americans, we had a lot of confidence in our leaders of getting us back into where we should be. I don't think we ever really thought that we would lose the war. I don't think we ever thought that.
So now, was morale high during the war?
Yeah, very much.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Morale. The morale was very high during World War II.
Okay. And then final question is, what was your reaction to the war ending?
Oh, we all got out in the street and danced and had a cheerleading, and we did all kinds of things. We were happy.
Yeah.
It's over. And but I was in the Navy already, so.
Oh yeah.
In fact, I was in San Diego, and I just felt, well, when do I go home? So I wasn't concerned that I was going to go home tomorrow, but when am I going home? And the Navy officers spent a lot of time trying to recruit people to stay in for a while. And guys like me thought, I don't want to stay in this thing. I want to get out. So then they came out with the GI Bill, which gave us an option. After we got out, we could go to college, and we could go for free. And it would give us a college education, which was something I think 9 out of 10 enlisted people and officers were happy to have, because it gave them an opportunity to fill in the college they didn't get, or the high school training they didn't get, or whatever, you know. And
Didn't it give you housing?